Welcome to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. For some years now, I've held two beliefs that cannot both be true. The first is, we're often kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. When they mess up, we tell them it's no big deal. When we mess up in exactly the same way, it feels like it is a big deal. It seems like we hold two different standards of behavior, one for us and one for others. And yet, at the same time, here's the second belief, we feel critical of people who do things that we ourselves would never do. Things we think of as thoughtless, inconsiderate, or a terrible idea. In other words, we hold other people to the same standards that we hold for ourselves, and sometimes find them lacking. Those two ideas contradict each other. We seem to have a different standard for others, except when they do something we wouldn't do, at which time we judge them by the same standards we try to live by. How do we understand this apparent contradiction? Do we have one set of standards for everyone, or two, one for us and one for others? I think the apparent contradiction can be explained in part by the difference between belief and behavior. What we hold in our heart of hearts, that is belief, and what we say and do on the outside, i.e. behavior, those are not always the same. We don't always do what we believe is right, and we don't always say what we believe is true. I've come to believe in the possibility that we do have just one standard. If we hate our bodies because they don't match up to a certain ideal we hold, we will notice how other people's bodies measure up to that same ideal, even if we say nothing or only nice things. If we judge ourselves lazy, we'll take note of anything that looks like laziness in others. We might not call them lazy, but we notice the violation of the standard. If we have concerns about being or appearing selfish, we will home in on selfish behavior wherever we see it, and we will certainly tell our children that selfishness is not acceptable. We carry our standards with us everywhere in the privacy of our hearts, and many of those standards we may not even be aware of. So often it appears that we have a kinder, gentler standard for other people than for ourselves, because communication with our friends, neighbors, and coworkers is mediated by social mores. We don't want to offend anyone and possibly lose those relationships, so we look for ways to be supportive rather than critical. With our self-talk, however, there's no such filter. The standards we hold, conscious or not, are applied without the protection of social niceties. If we're feeling really bad about something we've done, we might say to ourselves, "I'm so stupid," even though we would never say to a friend who did the same thing, "You're so stupid." This is why we're often told, speak to yourself the way you'd speak to a good friend. But have you noticed that trying to speak to yourself that way doesn't work in the long run? It doesn't remove the tendency towards self-criticism. Why? Because it doesn't feel authentic. And it isn't. By speaking to ourselves the nice way we talk to a good friend, we're attempting to apply a standard that doesn't really exist, that never existed in our mind, because there is only one standard, and it's the one to which we hold ourselves, even though we often give other people a pass. If you've been doing your utmost to avoid criticizing your adult child or someone else, and you're still getting feedback about being critical, then if you want to contribute to changing the picture, and the other person may have their own work to do around feeling criticized, but if you want to do what you can, then the first point of entry for you is self-criticism. How high are your implicit standards, and how do you speak to yourself when you feel you haven't met them? Criticism, judgment, negativity, perfectionism, these don't live in the spaces between people. They live within people. If we give shelter to unrealistic expectations for ourselves, unconscious, impossibly high standards for ourselves, and critical feelings about ourselves, then unrealistic expectations, unacknowledged, too high standards, and critical feelings can live rent-free in our hearts with access to our most important relationships. With friends and acquaintances, we might be able to keep our judgments to ourselves. But the closer we are to someone and the looser the psychological boundaries between us, the more likely it is that our negative self-talk, our self-criticism, will breach the surface and show its face in the relationship, either through words that slip out or through unconscious behaviors. So if your estranged or semi-estranged adult child has accused you of being critical, don't make the mistake of locating the problem entirely with them or between the two of you. Yes, they may have trouble with criticism. Many of us do. But don't let your only strategy be, I must not say anything critical around so-and-so. Your power to change the relationship and your experience of it lies in busting self-criticism and any negative thoughts and feelings you're harboring toward yourself. Assume those are finding expression in your communication with this particular adult child in spite of your best intentions. There is no downside to making that assumption. You can only gain by rooting out self-criticism. As long as you struggle to measure up to your own high standards, you will struggle to convey acceptance to your adult child or children. Because until we're able to accept ourselves as imperfect human beings, other people's imperfect humanity may sometimes be a problem for us. Remember, your relationship with yourself is the blueprint for your relationship with your child or children. So if you identify as self-critical or lacking self-compassion, I recommend local individual therapy with the right therapist, someone who demonstrates acceptance of both themselves and you. Your connection to that person can build a firm foundation for better relationships outside the therapy room. And no matter how old you may be, it's never too late for better relationships. Until next time, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So please take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.